Thank you very much. All those people moving towards the chairs. Thank you. Thank you. Dun, 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 dun. Thank you very much.
I killed my audience.
Yeah, but they watched the installation.
Okay.
Yes. But now they're around. They're around. Just like go with the microphone. Hello, audience. Yeah.
The thing, this has nothing to do with what I was about. This is your T-shirt. Yesterday, when I saw the show thing of people in the program, I have another T-shirt, and I wanted to know if you'd done it on purpose. And you answered that today.
It's a coincidence. It's a coincidence. I'm not promoting any show. It's a coincidence.
What I also enjoyed was at that moment, I didn't know whether you'd put the T-shirt on purpose or not.
Yeah.
So you both had and hadn't coordinated.
Yeah. No, not really. It's a coincidence. The rest of my T-shirts are dirty or wet, so it was the one. Yeah, it wasn't. Perhaps not. Perhaps it was decided from years ago. Okay, after this comic introduction, could you please make an introduction of your work or something?
Hola, again.
Hola.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, my name is R.L. Wilson. That's my artist name. You can call me Bob or Rob. I don't mind. I was selected by, I was asked by Islam Miguel to be part of the visual arts section, which is on the stage, which some of you may have seen, and most of you probably haven't. Yeah, it's a piece of work I made a couple of years ago, and it's reflecting on a lot of the themes that we were talking about at the festival, which is borders or not borders, you know, and it's kind of a playful look at one particular place that is close to my heart, which is a very quiet place up in the northwest of England. And I spent a month there making lots of material and researching, and that's one of the things that came out of it. Yeah, so basically, if anyone's got any questions, comments, or critique, hit me. Please don't be polite. I think apparently there's a perception that British people are polite. Well, fuck that. I don't care. Please be harsh. Say what you like. This is an open forum.
I'd like to know how you got the sand into that room.
I didn't actually get the sand into that. The sand came from the tears in my eyes. It was wheelbarrowed in. It was dropped in, and then wheelbarrowed. It was dropped in by a raven, and yeah, and then I carefully stamped on it.
Any other comments?
This is just a silly comment based on misunderstanding what Robin just said. I thought you said, how did you get the sound into that room? Which is actually a really interesting thing for you to talk about, because the layers of sound are really nice, and we sort of had a bit of a discussion about how the sounds of the theatre and the space kind of bleed into the work. So I wonder if you could just talk about that a bit. I mean,
yeah. It's quite a complex piece to talk about, but that is one significant element, is the sound, because actually it looks like a moving image installation, and in some ways it is, but the key to it is the sound, and it's quite fragile, and you kind of have to sit with it because there's a lot of little things in there. I came up with the idea, cut a long story short, I didn't want to edit any video. I thought I'm going to make a time-based piece, sunrise and sunset, so that I don't have to edit any video. Of course, me being me, I then ended up spending like 2 weeks editing the sound and mixing the sound. So you still sat in front of a computer doing that. All of the sounds were recorded in that space, about that space, from that space. And it can be, I mean, this is a really interesting way to present it on that stage, because you hear it booming out across the stage, which is an interesting presentation of it. I think I'd initially, ideally, would have had it quite contained, so that you could pass through and out, and the sound be separated. But I do quite like the bleeding of sounds. Yeah.
Any other comments?
I was just interested in how you wanted people to experience the work. When I was taking pictures, I noticed how people were looking, and because it's screen-based, most people are drawn to looking at the screen, and I think it was only Robin actually that wasn't that bothered with looking. He was just sort of, but it was interesting because normally something on the screen is the subject of the work, and it seemed like it was more of a background, and it maybe wasn't so important to look at it. But is it more about the overall environment rather than screen-based? I mean, do you mind that people don't actually look at the screen, or how do you want people to sort of?
Well, the intention is that you do absolutely look at either one of the screens and listen to the information being fed. The point of the image is because, yeah, it's all about that space, and that you do see this performance. If you see it from the beginning to the end, you see the interior of the space as well as the exterior, and the light gradually shifts. So you see the reflection, and then you don't see the reflection, and then you do see the reflection. It's just a slow process that you have to go through. So it's very much the intention that, yeah, image and sound are equal partners. They're married in that. But if people don't choose to, that's fine with me. But also, it's about a kind of meditation on a landscape. It's as much about meditating on a space. Yeah. And so what I tend to do in places is stare at them. I just stare. So that window that you see in there, I literally just would stare out of that window for hours and watch the water come in, watch the tide come in and out, and watch the sunrise and sunset. Does that?
Sorry. Yeah, so it's more of a place where you meditate. But would you say that, because it's a landscape which is more of a background and not too much happens in the background. So, but in a way that works in a way with the sound, because it's more about creating an atmosphere rather than something necessarily specifically happening on the screen that you have to concentrate on.
Yeah, and it allows, it basically allows an audience. What I try to do with a lot of my work is give an audience some time to think for themselves and project what they want. So you see the image, but you hear a lot of sounds, and that, in theory, allows an audience to really kind of project those images onto the image. So it's a dialogue between place, myself, and audience. It's yeah.
Just following on your comment on meditation, I was just curious to know how do you combine that meditation with the sense of humor of the piece? Because for me, more than a meditative piece is a piece full of irony and sense of humor. So I don't know how, for me, it doesn't really provoke a meditative space rather than a reflexive and full of humor and irony. So just how does two kind of concepts match?
Yeah, it's a really good point, because as much as I believe in the kind of it was brought up yesterday about the nothingness in a work, and that space, I also believe in disrupting. So for large sections of the piece, it may seem like there's nothing going on, or it's very genteel. The humor and the information is to disrupt that, and because it's this idea of like the sublime. There's like a long history in terms of, especially in British landscape, you know, the sublime. But to me, it's, you know, sublime and the ridiculous kind of go hand in hand, and also that kind of really old-fashioned idea of, you know, the green and pleasant land. Okay, well, maybe it is a green and pleasant land, but who owns the land? Who gets to decide who gets to be on the land? Who occupies the land? All these questions are really important to me, and try and feed those into the work. So it's a play on that. It's a play on, oh, isn't this place beautiful? I really want to, you know, I could live here, or I could look at this. Well, can you? You know, do you have that power? Who has that power to decide that? Because not many of us really do, in a way.
I'm curious about how was the process, because in your workshop you teach us, or okay, you introduce us just some way to start look things in a different way, or look things in the way that can be or can suggest something for us. It was a beautiful point of punto de partida.
Point of departure.
Point of departure. But I'm curious about your installation, because I don't know if what was first. You know, your idea about going there is far away, yeah. Going there and just shoot some image, record the sounds, and afterwards mixed about what happened there. Improvisation, you know. Or you had the previous idea about what to do before going there.
I had no idea about what I was going to do. So I went there, and I walked around, and I, you know, looked at the space, and I kind of read a lot about the space and the history, and kind of took a lot of photos, and I shot a lot of images, moving images, and I wrote a lot, and I recorded a lot of sound. So there's all this other material, this like ephemera that you don't necessarily see, you know, it's kind of other things. And then about the second week into the month, it was just literally from staring out at that view, I started to go, the birds marking the territory, you know. And I was just thinking about this, you know, again, who owns land, and who, you know, where do we belong? Where do people belong? And it was also thinking about, there were lots of ideas that came into it, but I was also thinking about this, certainly in the UK, like a lot of places, there was a lot of talk about immigration. You know, people are scared of immigration. I was thinking, well, you know, birds can go wherever they want. And just this marking of the land. So the idea actually came quite quickly after that. It was just kind of throwing myself into the place and, like, you know, picking things up, and then sitting back and going, oh yeah, that happens. So in a way, yeah. I think, yeah, it's important to reflect. I think it's important to do, reflect, you know, for me.
It struck me in the piece that you're very embodied in it. Like, it's your body on screen, you're embodying the raven and moving through the landscape, and it's your voice that we hear talking about all of the things. So although it's sort of like a meditation on the space, it's very much channeled through you. And I was sort of wondering about how that relates to it, like how much of it is you performing something, and about that, about you being there and performing it, how much it's important that it's you that is physically exploring these questions of space and who has access to the land and things like that.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I should also state that is a place that I've been going since I was a child, so it has a kind of personal resonance. I used to play on the sand when I was a small child, so I have a very personal connection to that area, and I do performance. I do live performances, and I write them, and I don't know whether it's an insecurity or an arrogance, I'm not sure, but I just kind of figure, the way my brain works, I kind of figure, well, I'm kind of the only person who can do this. I'm not saying forever, but in the last few years, it's kind of, and I like making a fool of myself. I'm like a shameless attention seeker, like probably a lot of people here, you know. So I don't mind that, but I also wanted to play with the idea of the shambolic performance. I don't have any training in performance. I'm not trained in any way. But obviously, you know, it's this dude in a van making a cup of tea, and then all of a sudden you see this dude like acting like a bird. It's kind of ridiculous, right? Yeah. And again, it's that ridiculousness that I'm just having a laugh, I think. But yeah.
But it's more than that. And for me, not many people stay to the end. I don't know if you talked about this earlier, the Sellafield and Shangri-La. I mean, to me, that was what the whole meditative journey had been. And you end up both in Shangri-La and Sellafield. Was that?
Yeah. It's layered. It's very layered. That's why I was reluctant to talk about it before people see it, because it's very layered, and you can get out of it what you want, but it's got all that in there. So it's very much it's a journey. It's a narrative.
Should I not have said that?
Sorry?
Should I not have said that?
No. It's fine. It's fine. So yeah, it's very much storytelling, and that idea of that kind of because the space looks otherworldly, alien, possibly utopic, you know, especially the way I kind of frame it and project this kind of meditative, quiet space, and then these little references to Shangri-La and going on a journey, but also are very much tied in with who owns that land, and it's owned by, and you know, the relationship between nuclear fuel, sand, the universe, you know, matter, Ministry of Defense, all these things are mentioned in there. So it's everything. It's all intentionally in there, but it's up to the viewer or the audience to take what they want from it, I think, for me.
And the way you just dropped in, this is where they made explosives to go and blow up similar villages in other countries. Just, gulp.
Yeah, because it's just a fact. It's just, it's a fact about that space, and it's. I was talking to somebody earlier about. We were talking about industry in the UK, and there isn't really the traditional industries, but one of the biggest industries in the UK, certainly one of the biggest exports, is the making of ammunition and weapons and warfare, and the UK government makes a huge profit through that, selling those arms, etc., worldwide. And, there's a really interesting relationship there. you don't. And the other thing is, you don't have to look too far to find these connections because they're kind of everywhere, wherever you live in the world, I think.
Great, thanks. I don't really normally enjoy this kind of thing, like video or like voiceover kind of art, this kind of thing. I'd normally like walk into this room and go like, and then go back out again.
Boring.
But well, yeah, but I really thought that was like masterfully composed. Like I almost like melted in the sand just because like I went in and there was a deck chair and I sat in the deck chair and there was a sunrise and a sunset and I love both of these things, and there's sand that I can like play with. I can spend ages just like playing with the sand, and then there's your like Yorkshire accent telling me facts about birds, and it's like, this is perfect. I just stay in here all day, and after this I'm actually going to go straight back in there. But you said about the reflection. I wasn't sure on that screen. Can you see a reflection of the room? Is that what you mean?
Okay, so it depends which juncture you saw it at, but at the beginning, it's not giving too much away. It's at the beginning, at the end, you see both the interior of the space and the exterior, so there's a reflection there in the window.
In the video?
In the video.
I see. I was really confused. I thought there were two videos superimposed on top of each other, and I was like, why is he done? So that the video's from inside the window, and what I see is you inside.
Yeah.
Great. All right.
Yeah, it's all done. There's no after effects.
No, cool.
It's all done in real time, and yeah.
I guess my only other question is about are you aware of the soothing and comedic value of your voice, and is this something that you've worked on? There is something especially good about like a Yorkshire accent, like telling you facts about birds is like really good. Did you practice the speech to like?
Oh shucks, thanks. This is a construction. My voice used to be really pathetic and uninteresting. And what can I say? I'm very conscious. Am I very conscious? I'm not too conscious of my voice, but I'm very conscious of the power that it has. I'm very interested in the power of people's voices, and just people's voices generally. I find really interesting in different accents because sonically there's these little shifts in everyone, and there's for me it's like little sparkles in my ears. So in terms of my voice, it's. For that particular piece, I was kind of playing with the voice of God. You know, you hear these documentaries, and this is the voice of God telling you that this is important right now, and kind of, but unpicking that a little bit, just playing with it. So, does that really answer? I don't know. It's, I like using my voice. Obviously, I mean, listen to me waffling on. It's not necessary. I don't have to use my voice all the time.
But was that just the voice in there? Did you do it in one take, or did you listen back and go like, oh no, that doesn't sound? Because there is obviously comedy in the delivery. It's very subtle and like deadpan. And is this just something that you were able to do straight away, or did this take attempts?
I had an idea of the tone of the piece, and the tone of the piece is to try and keep it as open as possible, to not be dogmatic necessarily, or or many other things. But I tried a few different versions, but it's more about the tempo as well, and the rhythms, and the spaces, the gaps. You know, it's like music. You know, it's the gaps between the notes as much as the notes. So yeah, it was pretty much it. There's a few different versions, but not much different. It's pretty much just this, yeah. Yeah.
Nice, thanks.
I've got two kind of things that made me think. All right, I'm coming. One of which was I saw it alone, and everyone was out here, And I was in, and I got a real feeling of like isolation from it and being a bit kind of freaked out being in that space. So one is like, did you ever consider it being a one-on-one, or see, I don't know what the term is, one person going in and experiencing it themselves. And then the second is like you mentioned about the structure of the piece and how another thing that in my experience of it, I joined halfway through. So when I saw this figure on the horizon, I didn't know who that was. And that was also freaking me out a little bit. So I wonder if, in terms of that, that's a very different reaction as to someone who kind of enters at the beginning and then sees that, like what you said in the mirror. And we almost become the point of view that you have in that thing. But entering halfway through, that's a very different sort of feeling. So I wondered, are you okay with that? And how much do you feel that changes the piece, or are you happy with that?
I'm totally happy with that. I'm happy for people to wander in and out. I think the reward comes from, seeing it from the beginning to the end, because it grows and grows and grows. But I'm totally happy for people to be terrified. And to, if they don't see it in any chronological order, that's fine, because I don't necessarily think life is that linear. And there's also there's information within the piece that is quite terrifying, and is it's quite an isolated space as well. So if you're in there on your own, that's all right. You're connecting with it in a different way. So I'm sorry you're terrified. I'll give you a hug later.
I'm still a bit terrified, actually.
We'll do hugs. But yeah, no, it's really interesting, and I like that experience. I'm interested in people's experiences.
But you're fine with that being. Say, if we imagine that people are going to see the whole piece, no, they're not going to come in and out. They're just going to see it, hopefully stick with it until the end. You're fine with them, for me to come in for that structure rather than the.
Yeah, because I think it's also quite abstract, and again, it's sort of non-linear, and it's definitely it's an abstraction. So I'm quite happy for people to go, oh, hang on, was I supposed to be there? What? So yeah.
Hello. I guess mine sort of picks up on that feeling that you are describing. I obviously had an insight into it from the workshop the other day, and knew that one side was sunset, one was sunrise, but there was a bit in the middle where, although I had sort of seen a more prominent sunrise on one side, I was completely confused as to which side was the sunrise and which side was the sunset, because it was sort of in the sort of limbo phase in the middle where they were both very similar. And although I had sort of watched the sunrise on one side, I got to a point where I was like, I can't remember which side that was. And like, it sort of really got me in a sort of confused state when I was in there. Then separate to that, my question is, how much have you experimented in sort of the presentation of it? So when we watched it in the workshop, it was just a film, and they were layered on top of each other. In what we see there, it's got a very particular aesthetic, and it's interactive in some way. I'm just curious as to what your exploration of how you present this material and how that impacts perhaps our understanding of it.
So the first point, well, I don't know, was confusion. Yeah, confusion is, that's all right, is it?
Yeah, it was an interesting, it wasn't like, it was an interesting confusion. It was just a moment where I was in the middle and I was like, oh my God, I don't know where I am, like,
right,
which one's which.
Yeah, that's interesting, yeah. Yeah, and there is obviously, I mean, there is an overlap. It's just light, isn't it? It's basically.
And I think it's
what?
because they're both walking. They were both at like the same point in the image, and they're both walking at the exact same pace. So there's a very, although they are different, they're very similar, and it just in that moment in the middle, I was like, oh my God, I don't know which one was I looking at when I saw the sunrise. So it's interesting.
Great. Yeah, great. And your second point, yeah, in terms of presentation, it's been screened as a single channel big screen projection, similar to the segment that I showed you at the workshop, which was kind of overlaid. So it starts with the sunrise, and then there's a fade into sunset. It has been presented like that. I'm really interested in audiences, viewers making choices, and that work is kind of like a lot of my work is about lines and borders and divisions and territories. So you kind of have to make the choice as to which screen you're going to watch. You can't really watch them both at the same time. And that's fine.
The deck chair sort of is a symbol of that in a way, because it's not pointed at either. It's directly straight ahead looking at nothing, in which you either have to turn your head one way or the other, which I found interesting.
The deck chair was a later addition in terms of the festival. It was a means for somebody to sit down if they wanted to. I don't know how I feel about the deck chair yet. It's too early to tell. I might need to sit on the deck chair for a bit and meditate on my own existence. Yeah, and also the sound. The sound is just really key. So it's about the surrounding rather than usually if you watch. Well, I didn't want it to be. I don't want you to see it on the internet, because I think we watch a lot of moving image on the internet and it becomes very disposable, and we just kind of like, yeah, okay, next thing, right, next thing. Is to sit with it, and when you see things on a single screen, it's very much you got just one direction, and you're having this information just, you know. And sometimes that's great, and I make work in that way sometimes. But for that piece, it sort of needed to feel like it was all around you in some way. And for the viewer, the audience, to move around that space and have it surrounding you. Yeah. So it's a spatial choice. Yeah.
I have another sort of like a supplementary presentation question. Have you ever done an installation of it that is like a lot larger? Because I was kind of feeling like with this thing about seeing the figure you in the distance and the sort of to and fro of that movement, and also crossing the width of the screen, but also crossing the width of the estuary, if it's an estuary, and about sort of the sounds there. So it's something to do with the audience feeling present or slightly more part of this meditation you're doing. Whether if the screens were a lot further apart, and also this thing about not being able to watch one at a time, whether the sort of act that you would have to physically walk to get closer to one or the other, which isn't the case in a space that small, you just sort of sit in the middle and decide which way to turn your head, whether that could sort of, whether that's something you've ever tried with the piece.
I haven't tried it. I kind of, I'm interested in that. You know, it's a piece that can kind of move and shift, and I like that. I like things that evolve in some way and in spaces. I think if you put it to too big a scale, I think there's more of a detachment. I suspect, in some ways, I think people detach themselves. In some ways, it can shift in dimensions of the space in some ways. I mean, we did actually try it out here where the image is a lot smaller and it's like you're looking through the windows of the van, but we kind of settled on for here that it would hit the top and the bottom, certainly of the screen, so that it touches the sand and it has that height. So yeah, scale, probably not massively different from how you see it. Even you could have a slightly bigger space, but not a lot bigger, I think.
Hi, I've got a couple of questions. One of them was similar. I was thinking about, because I've been here all week, sort of the evolution of the piece through this week that I've actually seen. So how initially it was that sort of window shape, much smaller, and the two piles of sand, and how that then changed to become like no longer islands, but an entire room where it became a much more immersive environment, and it stopped being a window and it started being a whole thing, and it was a much more immersive experience. And I was just wanted to know what you thought about how those two different versions, because as seeing it in both, I felt very different towards it in each moment. So what do you think sort of achieved what you wanted more?
Well, firstly, when did you see that?
At the big, in the first couple of days where they had the two like sort of hills of sand.
I guess you might have been lucky because that was probably before it was open to the public.
I think that was the first day because
Really?
there were definitely people in it when I saw it then.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that was just the first day.
We definitely, I mean, we kept having a dialogue as to, you know, what sand goes where, and then, how big the screen was. So certainly by Wednesday, I think it was, sand pretty much covered the floor and it was image top to bottom. So, but if that was the case, what can I say about that?
You don't have to say anything.
You say you saw something you weren't supposed to see.
That's a terrible question. Sorry.
No, it's fine. No, it's fine. I can see how that would definitely change your experience of it, and I think we just settled. By the Wednesday certainly we settled on a way that felt more comfortable for the work and for people, I think, or more accessible.
Yeah.
In a way.
I was also going to ask about, because work I've done with sort of sensory experience before, like experiments and readings and stuff, have often indicated smell as one of the most like visceral ways of accessing like feelings of memory and like an emotional part of you. And I thought as a piece focused on sort of memory, well, not focused, but has a lot of elements of like memory and time, if you'd ever thought about adding another element, but then like also is the fact that you only have the senses of sort of touch, sound, and sight, and is that supposed to be, like without smell, is that supposed to also act as a kind of distancing effect maybe? Like how you were saying, like how you can never, like who ownership of that land, like whether that's to do with that kind of distancing or if it's just something you hadn't thought about, or?
I'm definitely interested in sensory experiences.
But also like the fact that you have, because you're obviously you're not trying to immerse in that sort of total sense, because you still have that, it's still obviously a suspension of disbelief, a suspension of belief, because you've got sunrise and sunset, so that's not what you're trying to create. But I just wondered if you wanted to use that as a technique for accessing like sort of memory and emotion within your audience, so then they could more engage with like what the memories that you were putting forwards.
I think not for that piece, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
But for other works, I would definitely be interested in that. I think it's really tricky when you talk about multisensory work, because often I find it just feels like it's either there for the sake of it, we have a really complex relationship to our senses.
Yeah, and like when something is artificial, it can kind of jar.
Or even when it's
Yeah.
organic, when it's
Yeah.
natural, but it's taken out of
Out of
context.
context,
If it's
it-
taken out
yeah.
of context, we sort of don't believe it, you know. So it's a tricky one, I think.
Yeah.
It's totally a thing I would explore more, but it's not a thing that I feel
I don't think
is
it needs that. I'm
necessary.
not criticising.
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
No. Yeah. No, it's an interesting point because it is supposed to be. Yeah, you are. The idea is for you to be immersed in it, so that's understandable. Yeah. But yeah.
Thank
I
you.
don't know if that makes sense. Yeah.
Someone else? Yuri? Maybe this is the last one, Miguel? Yeah? So let's close this feedback session with Yuri's question.
I was just.
Oh yeah.
Important people.
Yeah.
So I was just when you were talking there about sensory experiences, to me it was like a novel. It was like being in a novel where there was detail and there was context and there was travel, and I was really pleased that it had an ending. So, and I don't know if other people who didn't experience the ending, it would be a different experience, but it doesn't matter. It was like a piece of poetry then, I suppose.
That it's what, sorry?
A piece of poetry if you don't get the ending kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely not meant to be literal. It's not meant to be. I want it to be as kind of open as possible within the context. Poetic is a beautiful way to describe it. I wouldn't, I couldn't say, but in terms of endings and beginnings, it's just the limits of technology in a way that gives us beginning and endings, or the limits of life, because again, things just aren't that linear, I don't think.
Sure, but you did have the figure ending up at
Yeah.
and you did have the sound and the connection. And that I suspect that wasn't a coincidence.
No, you're right. I mean, as a story, absolutely, it does give you a beginning and an ending, but hopefully not too.
Because you haven't seen the ending doesn't invalidate the whole thing. I thought it was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Bob, for your comments and everyone for coming back and making this very long feedback session possible. Thank you very much. And tomorrow, it's 12 o'clock, isn't it? Just to remind you that tomorrow we have another feedback session for the shows we're going to see this evening and the shows we've seen this morning. The early ideas plus the early ideas that won last year, early ideas. So whatever, you're very welcome to join us tomorrow, midday. And yeah, thank you for being here.
Oh, and Miguel's just asked me, hola, room. If anybody hasn't seen the installation on the stage, I'm going to walk through and you can follow me if you like. No pressure. Thank you.
Follow him.